Well, my work has me spend part of the time in Washington. I'm
Okay.
leading a national redistricting project of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee.
Hmm.
I also do some other consulting with businesses and some other political projects. Um, but I spend a lot of my time with family, which is wonderful. Running for office, especially running for statewide office like governor, is very demanding. You spend very little time at home, and I'm
Sure.
making up for lost time. We now have all five of our grandchildren within about a half an hour of where we live, and they're my five favorite people in the world. I spend some time uh, keeping up with my wife, Christine, who I know was just on your show as a
She
county
was.
treasurer.
She was.
So, I wish I were governor. I have no question about that. But I'm not the kind of person that looks backward. I look forward to new challenges. I've got some exciting things that I'm doing and a very important project to help make sure we have a fair democracy. So I'm really sinking my teeth into that.
Well, and you anticipated where I might go next based on what you said, and that was that obviously if you were governor, this sort of schedule might not have been the case, but
Well,
you
Richard,
seem
I would
okay.
always make time for you.
Well, thank you.
In my hometown of Battle Creek.
Right, right. But it sounds like you've adapted to the way things have turned out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have lost elections before, and that's the nature of politics. And I've always been one um, to take risks based upon my values and what I think is important. I had a vision for our state. I still have a vision for our state and our country, which creates an economy that provides opportunity for everyone, not just for some at the top, that we invest in educating our kids because they are our future. That's the key to building a strong economy where we protect our environment, we invest in our infrastructure, create good jobs, create a quality of life that we can all enjoy, and raise families within, create an economy around. So those will always be my values. People ask me, will I always be in politics? Heck, I don't know, but I can assure you that in some form or fashion, I'm always going to be involved in issues that help create the kind of state and the kind of country that we all hope they can be.
Mark Schauer is here, former congressman, former candidate for governor. We'll talk about this redistricting thing and what that means and some other things, too, coming up in just a minute. 8:14. WBCK. So redistricting, when Representative John Hoadley has been here in the past from Kalamazoo, he
Yes.
stops by on occasion. He's brought this up, and this is one of the things he's been working on. What does it really mean, the redistricting issue?
Well, folks have probably heard the word gerrymandering, and what that means is that politicians who draw district maps, and that may be for even at the city level, creating wards, county level, creating commission districts. Usually we think about it more at state legislatures and in the Congress. And what that means is the folks that control the redistricting pen, or now it's the computer mouse,
Right.
probably, work within the guidelines. Typically, sometimes they go outside of the guidelines, but use partisan factors to draw maps that favor their parties. And so we talk about partisan gerrymandering. Sometimes we talk about racial gerrymandering, where people of color are packed within districts. In fact, the courts have ruled in a number of states, including Virginia and Florida, a couple of recent examples, North Carolina, where the party in power, in this case has been the Republican Party, has done that. But it's in about 40 of the states, drawing of legislative and congressional districts is done by the legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So the party in power matters. And what we've found, Michigan is a case in point. I mean, you can argue we really are a battleground state.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're purple, light blue, whatever, we're not dark blue, we're not dark red. And even in my gubernatorial race, Rick Snyder just got 50.9% of the vote in a bad year for Democrats. Well, actually 51% of voters voted for a Democratic candidate for the legislature 51% of the voters voted for a Democratic candidate for Congress. But here's how it turned out. We, in the legislature, with 51% voting for a Democrat, Republicans picked up 4 seats and have a 63 to 47 seat majority. That doesn't comport with reality. And one more point about Michigan. In Congress, we have 14 members of Congress. You'd think it'd be about 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans, right? There are 9 Republicans, 5 Democrats. And that's the case in states like Pennsylvania, Florida, Wisconsin, Virginia, North Carolina. And what that adds up to, sort of on an aggregate basis in the Congress, is the Republicans who, and these lines are drawn after the census every 10 years. Okay, so
right.
it was last time it was 2011 after the 2010 census. 2010 was a wave year for Republicans. They won control of many legislatures. They drew the maps. That's why there is a structural Republican majority in the Congress. All I'm interested in, frankly, are fair maps that where sort of this principle of one person, one vote, where the districts represent sort of the makeup of the population occurs. That's what I'm working toward.
And Hoadley's talked about a commission that would try and do that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Michigan is an initiative state, as we know. People can collect signatures, put something on the ballot, whether to create an initiative law or to amend the Constitution. And we would have the ability to do that in Michigan. And he's introduced legislation to do that. There was a group led by the League of Women Voters and Common Cause that was looking at putting something on the ballot this year. That didn't get launched and hasn't happened. But here's the point. Only in about half of the states do voters have the ability to collect signatures to put something on the ballot. So the irony is, in a state like Wisconsin, where voters don't have that ability, there's a gerrymandered, Republican gerrymandered legislature. By the way, there's a federal lawsuit to overturn Republican gerrymandered maps there, but voters don't have the ability there. So the irony is, it would take a Republican-controlled legislature to create an independent redistricting commission. And what I know from my years in politics is, it's sort of like rational economic behavior. There's rational political behavior. A Republican majority, or, to be fair, a Democratic majority is not going to relinquish an advantage. So the people in that state don't have the ability. Representative Hoadley is right. We do in Michigan. It's an expensive proposition. What Advantage 2020, the initiative that I direct, I work with the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. If folks are interested, it's dlcc.org.
Okay.
We're the Democratic Party committee that works to elect Democratic majorities or defend Democratic majorities in legislatures around the country. And we see the importance of redistricting. That's why Advantage 2020 was created, and I was hired to direct that to help elect Democrats in battleground states like Michigan, so that 2011, when it's time to draw the maps, at least we control part of that process. And one last point, Richard, it's, the State House, State Senate draw the maps. I'll be clear, Republicans are going to control the Senate. There's only one election between now and 2020, and
right.
These are horrible gerrymandered maps. Who knows who the governor will be? That's the governor has to actually sign this. It's done as legislation. So we're just looking at controlling part of the process, so there's a little more balance and fairness. And I think if we get fair maps, ultimately the people win.
All right, and we could have a whole show on that, I presume. But
that's a teaser.
I want to make sure that we get to some other subjects here. Governor Snyder has called the Flint water crisis a failure at all levels of government. Do you suppose this could have happened no matter who the governor was? That if it is that grand a failure, that the momentum was already there for this problem before he took office?
Richard, that's a great question, and I mean that. And I want to be clear, I don't have a political score to settle here.
Right.
Okay, the election is over. But I think we have to understand that this did not have to happen. There were a set of policies in place, starting with the emergency manager law that put in place an emergency manager that Rick Snyder appointed to Flint. And by the way, this was a law that was overturned by the voters in 2012 and then reinstituted by the legislature with an appropriation, so the voters couldn't have a chance. We ought to do a show on that sometime. But the point is, the emergency manager, and I know former Mayor Walling and the council, they were getting their water from the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department at exorbitant prices. They chose another alternative to build their own water line to Lake Huron. That's where the Detroit water comes from.
Right.
And that decision was made. The decision was made by the emergency manager, Rick Snyder's emergency manager, as a cost savings measure to use the Flint River water supply.
Well, and that part,
that was signed off, approved by Rick Snyder's treasurer, Andy Dillon. I said during the campaign that I would do away with these emergency manager laws because they take away fundamental democratic rights of elected city council persons, mayors. So when you take away that kind of local control, and then you have folks that are candidly bean counters making financial decisions, and things like this can happen. And it was a cascade of mistakes.
Yeah,
a cascade. And here's the thing. I don't have an axe to grind, but when I look at, I think about the Enbridge oil spill that happened here. I had just arrived in Washington on a Monday night. My staff called me that night and said, this was discovered here. The next day, I had a meeting with President Obama that I was not going to miss. I told him about the spill, and he told me we will dedicate whatever resource you need. The next day, which was Wednesday morning, I flew back, was on the ground at the river, meeting with the EPA, meeting with Enbridge, meeting with the pipeline safety people, and was immediately on top of the situation. And here, it was warning sign after warning sign, people holding up bottles of brown water.
Right.
General Motors changing the water supply because the Flint water from the Flint River was corroding their parts. And here's a governor and administration that, when you look at the emails, saying, well, these folks have a political axe to grind. And they missed it.
I get your point.
And they missed it. But it started with a set of policies that sort of where the main motivation behind decisions was about cutting budgets, saving money, and this points to a larger infrastructure problem that we have in our state and our country. And when the priority is big business, corporate tax cuts, and cutting investments in infrastructure and so forth, we ultimately pay a price.
Now, with respect to what you've said about the emergency manager law, some of the response to that we've heard is, hey, listen, the people who were elected fell down on the job themselves, and thus we needed some kind of state intervention. What's your thought
in terms of, well, I think what you're saying is they fell down on the job in terms of financial oversight of the city.
Sure.
Right. That's the emergency manager law is essentially to take over management and financial management. What we have to understand is there are a set of circumstances. We could have a similar conversation about what happened at Albion schools. Okay, a set of policies which have disinvested in our communities. I mean, City of Battle Creek is not immune. They're a little less immune because there's an income tax, and that provides a little bit of a buffer.
Right.
But we see municipalities in financial distress all over the state, and they tend to be our core cities. Part of that is loss of jobs, loss of good-paying industrial jobs, loss of subsequent population, all of that adding up to loss of tax base. And then the state has dramatically cut what's called revenue sharing, which is is in the Constitution and state law as a way to help provide funding to municipalities. Keep in mind, Richard, that municipalities like Battle Creek or Flint or Albion or Kalamazoo or Marshall or Bedford Township, where I live, are creations of the state. So revenue sharing was set up as a way to help provide funding. All of that has been cut. There's been a lack of any sort of policy for our cities. And so I'm not surprised that a city like Flint, which, go back to, the movie Roger and Me, if you want a refresher on General Motors, cutting of tens of thousands of jobs, it's just hardly sustainable. And when you layer on state budget cuts on top of that. So, look, I'm not going to defend bad decisions made by local officials. That I'm sure there's enough of that to go around. But I don't think it's fair to say that, the Flint City Council or former mayors, caused the financial crisis within the city.
Time is flying by quickly here, but if we just take a look at the climate, I mean, I'm sure that there's folks listening who say, "Oh yeah, okay, there's the Democrat perspective. We hear the Republican perspective all the time. Stay listening if you want to hear it. Look at the presidential race right now and how polarized things are." Is there something somebody in your position could do to try and inspire collaboration or more of it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think someone like me that's no longer in office, that, people ask me if I plan to run for office. I don't have any immediate plans to do that. I'm a young man at age 54, so who knows what life may bring, but it's not top of my list right now. So I care very deeply about our democracy, our government. I care deeply about people. The people created our system, this representative democracy, and I think everyone has, including those who are currently in office, have an obligation to sort of elevate the discourse, get beyond a win-at-all-cost mentality, and we've seen laws change. Sometimes they're court decisions like Citizens United, which has put so much, unaccountable dark money, millions and some, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into our system, where I said at the time that with Citizens United, candidates would become incidental to campaigns. We need to sort of cleanse our democracy, and money is a big problem. But absolutely, it is, as a citizen, as a sort of an elder statesman, if you will. I really do. So my comments today, you asked me very important questions, and I don't have a political axe to grind. But it is about recognizing that who we elect does have consequences. The legislative maps that are drawn have policy consequences. The policies that are created, whether it's emergency managers, cutting revenue sharing, cutting funding for our schools, an agenda that's sort of privatizing education in our state, which hurts school districts, including, Albion. All of these policies matter. So ultimately, when I think about things, I think about my grandkids. What's going to help them be in a position to fulfill their dreams.
Well, I have to go, but we appreciate very much.
Come back sometime.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Former Congressman Art Schauer, former candidate for governor as well from Battle Creek. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
8:30.